Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth Radio here on Blog Talk Radio. I'm really sorry about the beginning of the show there. I was having some technical difficulties. Anybody in the chat room, please let me know if you can hear me all right. Today, I have a very special guest, Philip Imbrogno, and he is a prolific author and also a paranormal investigator. He has written many books on the subject, and he is into all of the various and sundry aspects of paranormal research, including ghosts, UFOs, the Jinn, which is one of his newest books in cooperation with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who will be on my show in the future, so look out for that. I'm sure today we'll have a chance to talk about the Jinn and their history, and we will also talk about some of the more high strangeness cases that Phil has been involved with in the course of his career. I'll remind you a little bit about myself. My name is Ted Torbich. Some of you may know me from YouTube, where my username is Tenebrous, Tenebrust, and my show over there is also called The Stench of Truth. And I do mostly political and economic videos for YouTube, but every once in a while I'll touch on the occult and paranormal topics as well. I'm going to get to reading a brief introduction here to Phil, but first I want to try to get him on the line. So for the moment, I'm going to go into the screening room, so this should only take like a moment or so. So please bear with me for a little bit of silence while I do this.
Hello? Hello?
All right, everybody, I got Phil on the line. I'm really sorry about the technical difficulties. As I said, I was having some trouble with the site. I had to reload it a couple times before it finally, before we finally actually got to the show. So I was a little bit late there. So anyway, I'm going to read a little bit of introductory material, as I said, by way of introduction to Phil's work. And I'm going to take this from the Llewellyn site, which is the main site that you can find Phil at. That's www.llewellyn.com, LLEWELLYN.com/author.php !author _ ID = 1324, or you can just go to llewellyn.com and search for Philip J. Imbrogno. And here's a little brief bio on Phil. He's from Connecticut. He's a recognized authority in the field of UFO research. He has been interviewed by the New York Times and Coast to Coast AM, has appeared on NBC's The Today Show and The Oprah Winfrey Show, and has been featured in documentaries on the History Channel, A&E, Lifetime, and HBO. Imbrogno worked closely with many top UFO investigators, including Dr. J. Allen Hynek and Bud Hopkins. He has been a science educator for the past 26 years with a graduate degree in chemistry and undergraduate degrees in astronomy and earth science. Some of his books, which can be found, as I said, at Llewellyn Worldwide, but also can be found at Amazon.com and other bookstores. I'm sure you can either get them there or order them. Here's a couple titles for you. The Vengeful Djinn, co-written with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that. Ultra-Terrestrial Contact. Files from the Edge. And Interdimensional Universe. I own all of those books. I just started reading Files from the Edge, but I did read The Vengeful Djinn, and I have looked into Philip's work previously. So, without any further ado, I'm going to bring Phil on the line, and we're going to get into some good discussion on the paranormal, UFOs, and high strangeness. Hi, Phil. Phil, are you there? Sorry about that. Are you there, Phil?
I'm here.
All right. Welcome to the show, Phil. I'm really glad that you agreed to come on because I absolutely find your work to be fascinating. And I have listened to a lot of interviews that you've done, and of course, as I mentioned in the introductory little bit of introductory information that I read there, I do own several of your books. And the last one I finished reading, of course, was the newest one that you co-wrote with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, The Vengeful Djinn. And that brought up a whole host of questions as far as paranormal phenomenon go. So why don't you give the readers a little bit of background about yourself, especially on how you got interested in doing things in the paranormal, to investigating the paranormal and coming to write about it like you have done.
Yeah, well, it's something that would fascinate anybody. And I've been investigating UFOs originally, and the paranormal usually just came in because when you're investigating UFOs, I mean, there are many cases that are paranormal in nature. So that led me into other forms of investigations and research into the paranormal. And, I try to really use a objective approach in the investigations. But you have to remember, when you're out there, I mean, sooner or later, you're going to be in the center of something happening. So I've had experiences which convinced me that, all of this stuff that we call the paranormal is real. It's just that human beings don't have a handle on it. And my background is in science, and I've been a science educator for the past 30 years. And so, I try to apply theoretical physics and chemistry and astrophysics in with my investigations of the paranormal. And when you do that, by the way, it starts to make more sense. You can take the paranormal out of the supernatural and out of the hocus-pocus world and see that, well, according to new theories in theoretical physics, we're talking about the idea of parallel universes. So, why not? Why can't some of this phenomena originate not from our reality, but from another reality?
Mm-hmm. I think for a long time there was this sort of a sort of single approach to paranormal phenomenon, and that included every aspect of it. Not only were there people who tried to specialize and categorize their own particular paranormal niche into a separate category that they wanted to keep clear from, all the other things. Like if you were a UFO investigator, that's all you did. And you tried to keep that to be a quote-unquote pure science away from, say Bigfoot or Mothman or the Jinn or poltergeist phenomenon, etc. And I think by looking at your work, you kind of validate my own feeling about the paranormal, and that is that we have sort of a meta phenomenon going on behind the scenes. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a meta phenomenon, and that meta phenomenon may be an interdimensional thing, as you said, and it may also be responsible for every varied aspect of the paranormal that people investigate. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, I agree with that 100%. One of the problems is that, you have people who are interested in ghosts. So, they want to put on the baseball hats and T-shirts and run out there and run out the graveyards with tape recorders and say, does anybody here want to talk to us? I mean, they're doing it for the thrills. You see, It's not really research being done. It's all for the thrills. It's the same thing with Bigfoot hunters. They're not trying to prove whether or not Bigfoot exists or not. Most of them are just out there just to run around on the weekends to have fun. And it's the same thing with UFOs. People who are UFO investigators, I'm not saying all of them. What they want to do is they want to go out and look for aliens because it's exciting. Because most of those people who were involved in UFO research were sci-fi buffs as children, so they're living their dream. But I tell you, the whole thing is very real. And I've worked with a number of people, and a number of people have contacted me over the years and wanting to work with me. Now, I'm out there, and sooner or later, they're going to get involved in some type of case where they're going to see some type of manifestation or experience something themselves. And, when that happens, the majority of these people, it no longer becomes a game to them. It becomes a reality, and they get their pants scared out off of them, and they drop out of the research because it no longer is a game. It's a reality, and it's something they have no control over. And my gosh, since the 70s that I've been involved in this, I've worked with so many people who just, got scared and said, oh my gosh, I'm not getting involved with this. I've worked with people who were atheists, and all of a sudden they start experiencing phenomena, and they become, all of a sudden it's the devil. They become born-again Christians and so on. So you have that, but you do have serious researchers out there that are trying to document stuff also. But it's like anything in human nature. I mean, if you get out there and if there's if people get attention and so on, they'll keep on doing it. You have to remember that many of the people involved in paranormal research, unless they were involved in that, because that's like an open field, and you don't have to be an MIT graduate or a Caltech graduate to be involved in this field. Anybody can contribute, but most of these people, you see, they want to get involved, and they get involved, and many of them end up just trying to prove a case, even by, and I hate to say this, but it happens, falsifying information.
Yeah, and I think that's very valid for you to say it, and I think it's very important for people to realize that there is some hoaxing, and these things do happen within the field of paranormal research, just like they do within any other discipline. It happens from time to time. It's not like a majority of people do this, but there is that factor that people need to keep in mind. So I think it's important to mention that.
On the other end of the spectrum, one of the heinous crimes in science is to say that something exists when in fact it does not. It's also true to say that something does not exist, especially if you haven't determined if it does or not. And this is the mentality we have on the opposite side of the spectrum.
So-called skeptics.
And but you see, many of those skeptics are in the scientific fields. And I'll give you an example. I have these incredible pictures. Okay, they were taken by an amateur astronomer, and they show a light on the moon. And with each frame, this light is moving across the lunar surface, and then it comes over a large crater. I think the crater was Hercules or Atlas or one of those. Anyway, the object moves above the crater, projects down a brilliant beam of light. You can see it in the picture clearly. It's illuminating the crater floor. And then it blasts out into space. Now, this is a phenomenon that has been noted since the 18th century, ever since telescopes were invented, and it's called Transient Lunar Phenomena, TLP. Nobody knows what it is. But you see, now I brought those pictures to an astronomer with a PhD who specializes in the moon. And my reputation precedes me in the scientific world. I am, a bad boy. UFOs, and so on. And I showed this person these pictures, and they looked at them, and they were, I can see in their eyes, they were fascinated by it. But knowing my reputation involving with UFOs, if they're going to say, oh, yes, that's something totally explainable, they're afraid that they're going to be quoted about, supporting a UFO case with lights on the moon. And I get the response that, I really don't have time to look at these right now. And I got the same response from 3 different people. Now, also, a number of years ago, a fellow who claimed extraterrestrial contact, he channeled these incredible diagrams of technical devices. I mean, these just aren't freehand drawings. These are something that, we put through the ringer. And according to a draftsman, a master draftsman would have to have had drawn these things. They're in vivid color. They're 32 devices of technology that he drew in the 60s that we're just starting to see today, like 3-dimensional viewing screens. So the diagrams went to all these different people. Everybody was fascinated, but there wasn't enough information. Now, I took the diagrams up to MIT, and I took it to the physics department, and I said, look at these diagrams here. And I took it over to Lincoln Laboratories, which is the MIT laboratory, and look at these. Oh, these are amazing, they're saying. Look at that. How does that coil wire like that? That's a new radical way. What is this? This is a device to accelerate photons, And then they said, who did these diagrams? We have to meet this person. Now the person's a night watchman. Okay, so and what did he do? I said, well, they were done by a night watchman who claimed that they were channeled through him from a being called Dinestra from a planet called Solarium. That's all. They would just walk away and laugh. And say, and under their breath, oh my gosh, I'm not getting involved with this. But the thing is, before I mentioned the paranormal connection, they were interested and wanted to meet the person. But once the paranormal was connected to these diagrams, they just turned a deaf ear and walked away and said, I'm not getting involved with this.
It always reminds me of this sort of dismissive attitude that people have by trying to make logical leaps that aren't warranted by research that you do. So if you say I have this picture of something anomalous, and you show it to somebody who wants to be dismissive of anything outside their sphere of accepted reality, they tend to try to class you into a camp of kook or nut. By taking giant leaps with what you're telling them. So if you say I have this anomalous picture, they say, oh, I guess you believe that aliens are coming here from Mars and abducting women for secret experiments and underground bases. Well, you never said anything. You know what I mean? I hear that all the time, Phil. I hear that all the time, and it's like, you're trying to present some piece of evidence, and you're not putting any baggage with it at all. Just like you said, you're showing these diagrams, and I saw the pictures in your book, and they're quite fascinating, and they look like they're very artistic, and they're also extremely detailed, and like you said, you're showing a piece of information, and you're just asking somebody's opinion, and then as soon as you mention the paranormal connection, it's an automatic dismissal. Whereas on one hand they're very interested, and then you say, well, this is where they came from, and all of a sudden, we don't want nothing to do with that.
Yes, in the book there are, I think, 3 diagrams presented, and they're in low resolution black and white. But the diagrams themselves are high resolution, vivid color. 32 of them. And it's probably one of the best examples I have that continue to drive me to continue to investigate people who claim some type of mental or psychic contact and continued contact with beings from another world. Now, one thing I'd like to add to all this, history has a tendency to repeat itself. And scientists today are making the same mistakes that their predecessors did. Back in the 15th century and the 16th century, rocks falling from the sky would have been considered a paranormal event. And there were many cases where farmers would see a meteorite hit the ground, and they would collect it in their field and take it to Paris, the Institute of Paris, and take it to the most learned men of their day, and they would look at this strange rock and say, "Oh my gosh, we've never seen a rock like this. Where did you get it?" And so on and so on. It's amazing. And they're looking at it, and it doesn't look like any rock they've seen before, the geology department, And then the farmer says, "It fell from the sky." And they laugh at him, and he walks away, and he's labeled a nut. Right. And they assure him that rocks cannot fall from the sky. And the same thing also in the 19th century, beginning of the 19th century, medical people in the United States military were meeting with Native American medicine men. And primarily what they were looking for is, natural medicinal plants and stuff like that the Native Americans used that perhaps, the people in, in the Army and don't know about, natural cures that the Native Americans have. So, in one case, Native American takes out his pouch with all his, little plants and ointments and stuff, and there were stones in there, and they were like shiny and everything. And one of the doctors said, these stones are unusual. And the Native American said, medicine man said, these are my star stones, and I use them for healing. And he said, where did you get them? He says, they fell from the sky. And they laughed at him, and they assured this medicine man, this Native American, that stones cannot fall from the sky. Well, later on, these a couple of these rocks were taken, and they turned out to be, siderites, iron-based meteorites. I mean, so this is what we're facing today. We have the same mentality, but on a little bit of a different scale as our ancestors did a long time ago. And you would think people would learn from their mistakes. The goal of science is to make known what is unknown, to discover. A scientist has to keep an open mind and accept all possibilities, and they have to admit to themselves that what they've learned from their professors, what they've learned from their studies and research, is not the final answer.
I don't think I could have said that any better. I think it's absolutely true, and especially in a position where you lack sufficient knowledge, as you rightly pointed out earlier when you said that it's equally valid to say that science cannot make a statement that excludes something that they have no evidence to support, any more than they could say something does exist if they don't have the evidence to support its existence. So I think both of those points of view are very valid, and it's something that people should keep in mind whenever they decide to look into these what are commonly referred to as fringe scientific topics, if you even get that good of an acknowledgement, sometimes called pseudoscience, and other terms that are designed to be derogatory in some fashion or another for a particular set of research, which has its own set of criteria for investigation. And I think that it's very good in your case, especially that you have a very strong science background and are willing to look into this phenomenon and to especially look at some of the more strange and weird cases that even some people in paranormal research will not look at, like instances of channeling, and of course the Jinn, which is kind of a, I guess they're kind of coming into a new vogue now, in a certain sense, because I'm starting to see references to Jinn a lot more now than I have, probably at any other time. And I think it may be because of the work that you and Rosemary did with the book, at least in part, that this subject is coming up again and being something that people are interested in looking at.
Well, I first introduced the Jinn in my book, Interdimensional Universe. And from there, it just roller coastered. Because there were a lot of people involved in UFO research, the paranormal, that also identified with some of the things that I was talking about that they were experiencing, that they've investigated. So in Interdimensional Universe, I first present the Jinn in its purest form, and it just rolled on from there. But, you have to consider that, when we talk about Jinn, some people identify it with a magical sort of being and so on and so on. These are dimensional beings, and they're probably responsible for a certain percentage of all the unexplained phenomena that we see in our reality.
And I'm particularly fascinated by the Jinn in one particular aspect, not so much so that they're the only piece of paranormal research which has, a long history in folklore, but that their folklore is, I should say, mainly very coherent throughout the centuries. And I think that lends it a certain credibility above, the things that are seen. Of course, UFOs have been seen throughout history, but they've been interpreted in a lot of different ways. So they enter the folklore stream in different aspects, and they're presented in different ways in history. But the Jinn are almost always represented the same way. They have a very solid core of folklore and mythology surrounding them throughout the history that they've been talked about, and I think that lends it a certain amount of credibility.
Yes, well, the idea of the Jinn was carried through the Middle Eastern countries, and even going back as far as the Sumerian cultures in Mesopotamia, and remember, this area is the oldest. One of the oldest cultures, so their records go back over 5,000 years. And if you go back all of those centuries, you see mention of the Jinn. And today, most people identify the Jinn with, Islam and so on, because, the Jinn are mentioned in the Quran. There's a whole chapter about the Jinn called Al-Jinn, and it seems that the Jinn are talking. And but the Jinn were sort of absorbed into Islam from ancient Persia, and so they've been known since that time before Islam, and it's human beings trying to identify a very ancient culture that's been on this planet, and the legends say, of course, that Jinn predate humanity, and that they were here first in this world, and they were the masters of this world, and they were taken out of this world and isolated into a parallel dimension. And of course, the stories are is that they want the world back. But Jinn are like humans; they have free will. They have a culture. They have families. I mean, there's a great deal of information written about the Jinn, not in the Western world, but over in the Middle East. And most of this information has been forgotten in the modern age.
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's an important thing for you to say that people shouldn't automatically classify this as being a thing that's associated with Islam, even though, as you said, there's the whole chapter in the Quran that talks about the Jinn. And remember that this phenomenon does originate from cultures older than Islam is a religion, and that the mythology and folklore surrounding them were, as you said, absorbed into Islam rather than being a creation of it. So I think it's important to not, just classify it as maybe like some might want to classify it as a sort of quasi-religious phenomenon, and I don't think that's a valid point at all. So I think it's a good point to say that in any case, so people can look at it with a better understanding that we're looking at something with a lot more history and a lot further back in time than the books of Islam were written in the life of Muhammad. So I think that's very important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, well, there's, some contradictions. It looked like, some of the great religious books in the West, the Jinn were excluded, and the Jinn are mentioned and called devils and demons. And the evil Jinn, especially over in the Middle East, are called devils. But one thing, the big difference is that in Islam there are no fallen angels like in the Western world, and no angels were cast out of heaven. The people who were cast out of paradise, the beings cast out of paradise, were Jinn, and one powerful Jinn by the name of Iblis defied God and would not bow to mankind like the angels did, and said, I'm better than they are. I'm made of smokeless fire. I'm the most beautiful of fire. They're made of the mud and the clay. Why should I bow to them? And, God said, go to hell. It's straight to that. So the fall of the devil in Islam is a Jinn. And that's an interesting thing, because the fall of the Jinn and the fall of Iblis is very similar to the fall of Lucifer in the Christian religion.
Yes, and of course the primary difference, I guess, between the two philosophies in that sense, you mentioned that Islam has no fallen angels, because in the theology of Islam, angels are automatically per se aligned with God. They have no ability to not be associated with Him. They can't rebel. It's impossible for them to do so. And but for some reason in Christianity there is a certain, at least some ability to do that, and that's why they have the fallen angel that's commonly called Lucifer, Satan, or the devil. And the relationship between Satan and Iblis is something that really needs to be explored, because, as you point out, the stories are very similar, and the character of the being it's in question is very similar as well.
Yeah, and when we look at Jinn, we have to remember that we're looking at a multitude of beings. It's not one single mind. All of them don't have the same agenda, and some of them have different likes, dislikes. Some of them are atheists. Some of them, believe in God. Some of them are even converted to Christianity or Islam or Buddhism. Some of them, have their own basic religion and understanding of the universe. They have limited lifespans. They live much longer than humans. They have much greater power, and they've been around for a long time. And they're the difference between humans and Jinn is that one of the things, psychically, in their psychic makeup, is the Jinn are very, very emotional, passionate, and they fly off the handle easy. They're uncontrollable when it comes to their emotions. And at one time, it seems that humans and Jinn existed in the world and coexisted together, and Jinn slowly were phased out. One of the reasons is that Jinn, thinking they're superior, started controlling human cultures. And I bet you this is where a lot of these Mesopotamian and, Sumerian, gods came from, all these things, that they were actually Jinn. Also, we have Jinn mentioned in Solomon's story. We have in the Islamic version of the Quran, Solomon controlled the Jinn and enslaved the Jinn to build his cities and the great temple by using their power. Now, when you take that into the Judaic interpretation of Solomon, the Jinn are not present. It's people who built it. So you have this different idea. But you look at all those stones and all those great cities and stuff, boy, if humans built them, that's a wonder. But it seems that they were built by perhaps Jinn. And, Jinn that were unruly and very powerful, that were a threat to humanity, according to the legends, were sealed and put in captivity by Solomon in various vessels and devices and rings and so on. Now, in the Arabian Sea, when fishermen bring up their nets and there's a very old bottle there and it's capped, they will not open it. They'll throw it back in the water because they believe that it could be the prison of a very nasty Jinn.
Mm-hmm. That certainly explains the origin of the idea of the genie in the bottle.
That's where it comes from.
Yes, indeed. And, of course, we've seen that in popular culture in lots of different ways, like I Dream of Jeannie and...
she's my favorite Jinn.
Well, if they were all like her, I guess we wouldn't have much to worry about as far as the Jinn go, I'm sure.
Well, there are some Jinn like her, according to legend. They're called Green Jinn, and they're the least powerful. They're the youngest. They're fascinated with humanity. Some of them have even attached themselves. They become romantically involved with humans. They become very, very attached to certain people and follow them and become jealous. But there was one episode in I Dream of Jeannie where Jeannie made this great mistake, and she's apologizing to Tony, the astronaut, Larry Hagman. And Tony goes, "No, Jeannie, don't worry about it. After all, you're only human." And she goes, "No, Master, I am not human. I am Jinn." But I mean, whoever, when they did that series, they did do a little research. But the movie about Jinn, in which someone did a heck of a lot of research. It was a movie from the 60s called The Brass Bottle. And it starred Burl Ives and Tony Randall, and Barbara Eden was in it. But Barbara Eden wasn't the Jinn this time. She was the girlfriend of Tony Randall, and Burl Ives was the blue Jinn who was released from the bottle. And they did a lot of research on that into the Jinn legend because, all the nomenclature and vocabulary and the way Jinn act are presented in like it's real. And in some cases, Jinn keep on making mistakes. You don't want to get wishes from a genie, a Jinn, because at the third wish, you're going to wish that you never wished for the other two wishes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen that played out in some other stories, too. Like, I think there was a Twilight Zone episode.
Definitely.
With a store owner, who finds the bottle with the Jinn in it. Which didn't turn out too well for him, at least for the first.
The Jinn is in our history. I mean, we have it, but we have a little bit of different view of it. In the Middle East, I mean, to them, Jinn are like the people who live next door. They're like not to be messed with, the strange people who live next door. They're very real to the people of the Middle East. There's no doubt in their mind that Jinn exist. And, of course, they wrapped a lot of superstition around the idea of Jinn. To me, I believe that Jinn, which the word Jinn means hidden, I believe that they are dimensional beings. and they are beings that live in a parallel reality very close to ours, and they're not human.
Well, and I think that goes, at least speaking for myself, I think that goes for all of the genuine paranormal phenomenon that we deal with. I believe it all has a dimensional connection, an interdimensional connection. At least the authentic versions of paranormal phenomenon that are seen and experienced by people. That's my own particular view, and certainly the Jinn would be classified that way. But I wanted to hit you with something a little bit different, Phil, regarding the Jinn, and then we'll talk about that for a little bit more, and then get into some of your other work. But I'm kind of fascinated with the work of a website. I think it's called thunderbolts.org. I don't know whether you're familiar with that or not. They do research into the idea that the universe is actually an electrical system, rather than being, classically along the lines of gravity and all these other forces, working in some measure. They present the view that I'll just give you an example, the Valles Marineris on Mars, they contend, is actually from a giant electrical arc. Whenever another planet passed very closely to Mars at some point in history, a giant bolt of lightning, for want of a better word, traveled from one planet to another and left that scar, which is very similar to scars that would be left in material that was hit by a high voltage current. Now, one thing that I found very interesting is that someone who was affiliated with that website did a very interesting analysis of ancient Indian dancing men figurines and compared them with plasma discharge in the laboratory, and found that there was a correlation between the way the figures were drawn, in other words, with their arms up and their legs down and looking like, having very distinctive shapes. And so their contention was they were using this as an idea that plasma discharges and things of this nature was something that the ancient Indians, or the Paleo Indians here in the United States and other places around the world, were actually seeing plasma discharges in the sky, and they were drawing those rather than drawing whatever gods or whatever kind of mythological thing you want to attribute that to. And it instantly made me think of the Jinn, because of smokeless fire, the Jinn could be considered to be a plasma. And I don't know whether you ever looked into that or not, but I thought that was a potentially fascinating connection with ancient depictions of Indians, of these stick figures that have a close correlation to plasma discharge. I wonder if you had ever heard of anything like that before.
Yeah, well, I have. There are. I actually have. I actually been doing some research in that area right now, and some of the Native American descriptions of what apparently is a plasma discharge, and also some of the ancient legends from other cultures that talk about the same thing, and some of the things that have been found. For example, in the Indus Valley, there's an old abandoned city, which looks like, for example, that according to the sand and the glass that was fused there, like it was bombarded with plasma discharges, and that may have killed everyone there and driven everybody else. Oh, and a lot of the material that makes up the walls and the ground has been ionized as if hit by a plasma.
Very interesting.
So this is going on. Also, there's in the Hopi, there's a blue Kachina dow, which is attached to the star Sirius. When the star Sirius is supposed to be in a certain position in the sky and changes a certain color, these discharges from the sky are supposed to come down and end things on the world. And that they're predicting that to happen soon. And, I'm saying to myself, what do you mean the star Sirius turning red, from blue to red? Well, if there's a white dwarf orbiting Sirius that draws off material, and Sirius accumulates this material, and it creates a sort of like a shell around Sirius, which makes the star turn red. And it may have been red throughout history, because in Homer's Iliad, the star Sirius is mentioned, and it's saying that the Achilles' armor and shield was like the star Sirius in the sky, and Achilles had crimson steel, but they saw that star as red, and we see it as blue. I don't know. Maybe the Hopi's right. Maybe we're going to have these discharges from the sky very soon, and it's going to cause quite a bit of havoc. I mean, it's obvious that some ancient cultures did experience this phenomenon on Earth.
Oh, yes, and like I said, I thought another possible explanation for some of these plasma discharge things that these ancient cultures had been seeing could possibly have been Jinn, actually in some sort of quasi-human form, and that would explain some of the depictions that we see in history with those.
Yes, well, 90-something% of the universe is plasma. So when we're talking about the Jinn being plasma, we have to remember that they're more suited to be living in this universe than human beings. Because, Jinn are plasma contained by magnetic fields. And that this is why they're notorious shapeshifters, because all they have to do is rearrange their magnetic field and they can take on different shapes. And so, so they can take a disguise in anything they want. Plus, I'm sure that, they have control over certain types of plasma and can create plasma on demand, which could be a very, very dangerous weapon that can be used. So, when you take all that into consideration, the idea of Jinn becomes more real, because my gosh, the Quran says they're made of smokeless fire. What does that sound like? It sounds like plasma. If they say human beings were made of the mud and the clay, that's atoms, and the basic particles that make up atoms. The Jinn were made of smokeless fire, plasma, and the angels were made of the purest of light, photonic energy. It says it right there.
Yeah, it sounds like an instant classification system from so quote unquote higher orders of being down to quote unquote lower orders of being, from photonic energy down to physical matter, and the Jinn being like right in the middle,
Well, if you go to the Middle East and you bring up the idea of ghosts or UFOs or things like that, many people will tell you that really do believe in this, and they'll say, there are no UFOs, there are no ghosts, there are no Bigfoot, there are only Jinn. But we also have to consider that the Jinn world, their reality, the Jinn may not be the only beings that exist in this reality. There may be a multitude of life forms, just like there's a multitude of life forms here. There's stories that the Jinn do have animals and pets that they keep, sort of like we keep dogs and cats and birds and so on. And although some of their pets we would not like to see, they're supposed to be, according to our beliefs, they're supposed to be hideous sort of monster-like things, but the Jinn think they're cute. Their children have them for pets. Who knows? The Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, maybe one of them. Who can say?
Yes, indeed. And I think that it would be hubris also to just say that we're only talking about a particular one class of being or one particular phenomenon. The metaphenomenon that's going on certainly can include a multitude of different sources. And in fact, the manifestations of all these different paranormal things in such a wide variety of things that are experienced would tend to make you believe that you're dealing with more than one type of creature or entity or energy force or whatever you want to call it, just by the varied nature of its manifestation.
Sure, human beings like to put everything into a nice, neat little category so they can understand it and feel comfortable with it. But, that's not the case with the paranormal. The paranormal is a multifaceted phenomena. There's multifaceted explanations for things that we see in the paranormal. And, if you just can't put one label on it. And this is one of the mistakes and this is human nature. This is one of the mistakes that human beings make. And in order for us to really shed some light on this particular topic, people are going to have to expand their minds and consider things that they would not consider before. And I always say, the paranormal is like chemistry, astronomy was in the Middle Ages going into the Renaissance. It was a new science. There was a lot of wild ideas, a lot of supernatural belief put into it, a lot of hocus pocus, and a lot of religious beliefs tied in with it. But out of and a lot of dreaming and speculation and so on. But out of those mystical sciences that were once alchemy and astrology, astronomy and chemistry were born, and they're sciences of, modern times. Right now we're in the same position with the paranormal. There's a lot of wild ideas, a lot of hocus pocus, a lot of supernatural beliefs, and people tying in religious beliefs with the study of the paranormal. But I believe that someday a science will be born out of it. And the science that we have now will merge with our study of the paranormal and create a new view of the universe, a new view of the cosmos, a new view of the multiverse. And, it'll expand human consciousness. But if people keep on saying this can't possibly exist, we're never going to discover or take a step forward. And you have to remember that speculation leads to discovery. Imagination leads to discovery. Yes, you may be wrong, but you may have a part of it correct that someday will add to the pieces of the puzzle so that we can get a better understanding of what people are experiencing today.
Yes, I think that's very wise words when it comes to paranormal research. If I might interject here, someone in my chat room has a question for you regarding the Jinn. Being that they are plasma beings, what would be the result of a direct interaction between a Jinn in its plasma form and a human? Do you have any speculation on that? Like what kind of effect they would have on the human, etc.?
Well, we have accounts in history where Jinn have just touched people and made them ill or burned them alive. But there are also cases where Jinn have been able to connect with humans and not harm them at all. So I guess they can control, what part of them could be deadly or not. Jinn could be, hot ionized plasma, or they can be cool plasma, I guess. So they seem to be able to control their nature to either do harm or not do harm. And but there's even, stories about Jinn possession and possessing humans, so they do make some type of connection without harming humans.
So the answer would be that it's varied, and it certainly would depend on the encounter and the Jinn. Then, I guess.
Oh, if the Jinn wants to kill you, it would kill you. It would have no problem.
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
mean, in the Middle East they say, you don't fool around with Jinn, because because if you get one angry or you hurt its family, they will come and kill you. I mean, as simple as that. That's what they believe. This is why they fear them so much.
Wow. Well, I think that's a good thing for everybody to realize, that if you want to get serious about doing any kind of research into the paranormal or any particular aspect of it, do not tread lightly, and do not treat it as a lark. This is something that is very serious, and you should take it very seriously, and you should realize that there are possible consequences. And I think it's very important for you to emphasize that, as you have done several times in our talk so far. And I think people should take that to heart, because, quite frankly, as you pointed out, there are a lot of people stumbling around haunted houses and graveyards and all these other things, trying to put on a show. And I think all you have to do is look at the examples that you cite where people have a legitimate experience and then they run for the hills because they just want to, have fun, camping out for a weekend or going into a dark, musty old house to try to get somebody to pay attention to what they're doing and, supposedly have some fun. And this should not be approached with any kind of attitude where you're just going to go off on a lark. It's something that does have serious negative consequences that are possible, at least. It doesn't mean they're going to happen to you, certainly, but it's certainly a possibility. And I think it's important for people to realize that. Now, Phil, one of the most fascinating things about the Jinn, which you bring up in your book, is the idea that the military is actually trying to capture a Jinn, or at least to capture and try to understand and utilize the interdimensional nature of these creatures. Could you speak about that for a little bit? Because I think that is a very fascinating part of this whole story.
Yeah, well, the first time I came across this was in the 1980s, where in the Hudson Valley there were thousands of UFO sightings. And there were certain areas where the military would move in, and they would channel off an entire area. They would close it down, and they would knock on the doors and tell people to stay in your house. Don't be worried. It's just a training exercise. People would look out of their windows and see vans pull up with obviously a special unit of people get out. And there were helicopters, coming in low, and, soldiers all over the place, and roadblocks and all kinds of vehicles. And this happened more than once on both sides of the Hudson River during a peak of UFO paranormal activity. Now, my investigation showed, that this unit, this special unit, was in cooperation with the military. And the special unit was coming in, and their main purpose was they believed that dimensional beings were coming into our reality from these areas, and they were trying to capture these dimensional beings to obtain the technology that they use to cross the dimensions and to possibly stop them. Now, that was the first time, and I let it go, and said, well, that's interesting, and so on, and there were a number of cases and so on. Then, in the 1990s, I was over in the Middle East. And to make a long story short, I was not researching the Jinn. I just got drawn into the Jinn by hearing so many of the stories. And I had a friend who worked in the Saudi government. And he got me into Saudi Arabia. And I was invited, actually, to dinner at the palace with a member of the royal family, who was a cousin. The royal family was a minister of some sort, and there were other people there. And it was sort of like a business pleasure sort of dinner, cocktails, and so on with ambassadors from assistant ambassadors from different countries. And I was sitting at the table, and the cousin of the prince looks at me and says, "You're an American. What are you doing in my country?" And I said, "I'm researching the Jinn." Because at that time, I was researching the Jinn. And he yells at the top of his lungs, "The Jinn! I can tell you about the Jinn." He says, "They come in through my country, and your government and the European government and other governments of the world and my government are trying to capture one." And I said, "Well, did they ever capture one?" He says he didn't know because it was the greatest security. Well, to make a very long story short, I ended up in being directed to a very holy man down in the center of the city, Radia, and who told me all about the Jinn and told me I would have to go to Oman to a place called Majas al-Jinn, which was called the meeting place of the Jinn. Well, I went to the meeting place of the Jinn and had this incredible experience there and scared my guide and interpreter away. But the bulk of the story is that during that time in a town called Finn in Oman, near the Hajar Mountains, I had the chance to talk to a teacher who spoke English very well. And he would hike through the mountains. One day, he said, while hiking, he saw a black circular area open up. And through the opening, he said, came a Jinnaya and her child. A Jinnaya is a female Jinn who are supposed to be very, very nasty when they're with their children, like, black bears protecting their cubs. And they're very leery of women, of humans. So the female Jinn can be very deadly. And he said the Jinnaya looked at him, was surprised that he was there. With a look in her eyes, he said, and she was in human form, and her child was in human form, but the eyes were yellow, and they looked reptilian in nature. And the Jinnaya looked at him like, if you make the slightest move, you're dead meat. He just froze and then turned around and ran. And he kept on running, and he kept on running over the hills. And all of a sudden, helicopters came over the ridge, very low, in jeeps. And the helicopters circled around, and he said military personnel put him into a jeep and took him into the mountains where there was a clearing, where there was a base of operations. And he was taken in a room and debriefed. And he said it was obvious that this military establishment was placed there, and he saw European military, he saw military from the United States, he saw military from his country of Oman, he saw Saudis there, and members from other Arabic countries. And he said that it was obvious by the questions they were asking about what he saw and how it happened that they were trying to capture this Jinnaya or Jinn that come in through that area, which is a portal area. He said, and he wouldn't talk anymore, he was obviously more frightened by the military presence there, how they threatened him, rather than the Jinnaya. So this is like three different sources that I hear this, and about the governments of the world, a secret sort of organization within some of the major powers, trying to capture one of these dimensional beings. And of course, these dimensional beings are called Jinn.
Very interesting. It sounds like an extra-national group, something that's operating outside of any particular nation state.
or they have worldwide cooperation. You know, by and wherever they go, they have military, assist them, just like they did in New York. The special group came in these, white vans, and these people got out that were, dressed in certain types of what the residents call radiation clothes. But the military was around them, and the military was, closing off the area and making sure the people stayed in their houses. So wherever they go, they had military background. You know what it reminded me of? Have you ever seen the movie Predator 2?
Yes.
With Danny Glover, with Gary Busey plays the leader of this special unit that's trying to capture a predator. And wherever he goes, he gets the military and the police to cooperate with him because his clearance is so high. It almost back in the 80s, back into the 90s, it reminded me of that movie. I mean, this could have been really going on. There could be dimensional beings that are merging into our reality. Our government knows all about it, and they've either been trying to capture them or stop them. Amazing. I mean, what you pick up.
It is, and you're not the first person to talk about this particular aspect, at least to me anyway. You may have been the first to actually print about it, to write about it. But I had Nick Redfern on my show a while back, and he talked about the secret government think tank that had decided that the UFO phenomenon was a demonic phenomenon. And he also mentioned that there was, some interaction between that group called the Collins Elite and another group within the government, or maybe even, part of the group you're talking about, which was actually trying to, make deals with these entities, for want of a better word, or to, try some manner of capturing them or using their technology or something like this. So having him as a guest on the show is the first time I had come across it. And then when I read The Vengeful Djinn, I saw this again, and it just made me think that it kind of stands to reason, really. I mean, you would think that the military and governments around the world would be interested in something that has a power that is so enormously potential, like they do. And apparently, it's just. I mean, one could conclude that this is just a natural phenomenon of these entities, that they're able to pass from one dimension to another, and it may be something that could be reproduced and used for not only for traveling but also for weapons technology, I'm sure. So it does kind of stand to reason that they would be interested in be trying to look into this for sure.
Definitely. I mean, it makes sense to me also.
Yeah.
Hearing it from, 3 different locations from different parts of the world, I mean, in different countries, in different situations. I mean, when I was at the dinner table and a member of the royal family, when he heard the word Jinn, he got all, excited. And he just blurted out, maybe he wasn't supposed to say that, but he said, your government and the governments my government has been trying to capture one. And, and I went, whoa. And then when I went into Oman and heard the story from the teacher, I said, oh, my gosh, I wish I would, was able to go back into the mountains to find this secret base of operations. But it's no one was willing to actually to go there. They said it was incredibly dangerous. It's like, I guess, going into Area 51, you could be shot.
Yes, indeed.
I'm sure if you're in a foreign country and you're an American over there, I mean, I'll tell you, I was driving up and down, down the coast to Finn, and I made a comment to my interpreter and to my guide that, my gosh, the roads are so clean. Everything is so clean in this country. If I drive up and down the road here, I see garbage sometimes, McDonald's containers and so on. And they said, well, littering is punishable by death here. That's why it's so clean. So you can imagine if you go into the mountains and you violate a security area, I mean, they're not going to hesitate to shoot you. I mean, if they would execute you for littering, I mean, walk into a security area, I mean, you could be gone. I think this is why this teacher was so afraid, because he was afraid he was not going to come out of there.
Yeah, it sounds like it. As far as like the Jinn, I believe you mentioned in your book that it seemed as though there were some protections that people could employ, if they came across a Jinn. Did you ever encounter in your research, and you're looking into this, any examples from history or folklore of people actually killing the Jinn, killing a Jinni or a genie?
Oh yeah, Jinn have been killed. They can be killed, but the problem is that in some cases the Jinn that was killed was a juvenile or a young Jinn, and the family came back and got revenge. And so you hear stories like this. In Saudi Arabia, out in the desert, they say never, violently or throw something like rocks into an open area, because there might be a juvenile Jinn there. Just, curious, watching you, you may harm them, and if you harm them, his parents or her parents or the clan members are going to come after you. So, but there have been cases where people have killed Jinn in history, yes, and controlled Jinn too. And one of the things that is obvious that, you see, Jinn were contained by copper vessels with mesh of iron. Now, the iron had to be very, very special. It was made of magnetite. So magnetic fields, you see, plasmas are very susceptible to magnetic fields. So if you think about this in history, Jinn were contained in iron containers or copper containers that had this mesh of iron around it that was magnetic, like lodestone. It created a magnetic field which contained the Jinn. And now, when people have encounters, let's say shadow people, and I believe that shadow people are Jinn, and they're peeking through the dimension, watching us, getting information. And when people turn on all their appliances, all their lights, radios, they create a magnetic field in the electrical wiring in the house. This seems to keep the shadow people away. Yes, Jinn are very susceptible to magnetic fields, so they could be harmed or driven away or even killed, possibly by electromagnetic pulses. And one of the things that I heard is that over in the Middle East is that Jinn are very afraid of humanity, because if humanity destroys itself in an atomic war, that those EMPs that are created in the atomic blast are going to filter into the Jinn dimension and wipe them out also.
Very
interesting. You can imagine why they look at humans as some type of dangerous, psychotic creatures that are on the verge of destroying themselves.
Well, hey, that's the way I look on humans, so for the most part.
Well, I mean, if you look at humanity, doesn't have really a good track record with all the wars, I mean, and everything like that. So if you get these being called Jinn that are very old and maybe learned their lesson, and they're watching humanity and saying, I hope they don't do this, I hope they don't do this. If they do this, we have to stop them and go in. So there's also some Jinn that only have one purpose in mind, and that is the destruction of the human race. So they can move back in here. Some Jinn are indifferent. They could care less. And there are some Jinn that are just waiting and biding their time and getting more powerful because they believe that one day they will move in and be masters of this world again. If humans are still here, they will rule them.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. The Jinn are a fascinating subject, and the various interactions throughout history between humanity and Jinn is definitely very fascinating. The book
never been too good, you know. The Jinn are still resentful because, according to legend, they've been made slaves by humanity. Solomon enslaved the Jinn, all the Jinn, and forced them into slave labor to build his temples. And they had no power to stop him because Solomon was given dominance over the Jinn by God, they said. I mean, you know, and the Jinn had to obey.
Yes. And, of course, I think there's also ritual magic components of some Middle Eastern tribes and groups which can call and command Jinn via what we would consider to be like ritual magical acts as well. So there is this notion that humans have some sort of ability to call forth and command or harm the Jinn. So it would stand to reason that they would be either, you know, very mad at us for messing around with them, or at least be very, very leery of being involved with us for fear of what we might do, whether whether inadvertent or not. You know.
Well, you know, it is possible, for example, to make a deal with a Jinn, and I'm sure there are deals going on right now that we're not aware of between certain political leaders, certain people in the industry, certain people who are financial giants with making deals with Jinn. Who knows? All this commotion in the Middle East in Libya going on right now, with all these countries rioting. I mean, it could have, you know, Jinn base to it, you know, to get control of that area. But in Saudi Arabia, they have this, you know, people use the Jinn sometimes to claim that their actions were not their own. They were not responsible for their actions, that it was a Jinn. For example, a young man was approached by a Jinn, story goes. And the Jinn said, I will give you anything you like, 3 wishes of anything you want, to a certain degree, because their power has limits to it, if you let me use your body for a while. And the Jinn wanted to use the body to experience eating and physical pleasures and sex. So, the Jinn enters the young man says, fine. The Jinn enters the body. The Jinn goes wild, goes drinking, you know, carousing, and so on and so on. And he actually kills someone. The person in the body, they get arrested. And then at the trial, of course, you know, the sentence is going to be death. The Jinn leaves. The Jinn says, time to leave. Goodbye. Leaves the body, and the person becomes conscious and says, what am I doing here? He's being tried for murder. And he says, well, I didn't do it. It was a Jinn who possessed me. Sort of like, you know, the Western version of the devil made me do it.
Yes.
But there's also cases where Jinn possess people. And you can't get the Jinn out. The Jinn has to leave of his own accord. So they get a holy man in there, or a cleric, a Muslim cleric, and he comes in and he talks to the Jinn, who's possessing the body. And he says, well, how long are you going to be in that body? And the Jinn said, well, maybe I'll stay in here a week. Well, can we make a deal? You know, you stay in the body 1 week, and then we'll leave you alone. You can experience pleasure, but then after 1 week you have to leave. And the Jinn may say, oh, okay. But over there, you see, if the Jinn doesn't leave, the next step to get the Jinn out is to beat the body. So they get these sticks and they get this person completely naked, and they start beating him with sticks because they feel that the person doesn't feel the pain, the human, but the Jinn will feel the pain because the Jinn is controlling the body, and the pain will drive the Jinn out. This has actually been done, and it's still being done over there in these cases of Jinn possession. That
sounds like some more animistic sorts of exorcism as well. They employ physical pain to try to get the beings out.
Yes, in Jinn, Jinn don't respond to, you could sprinkle holy water all you want and do the sign of the cross and go through that whole, ancient ritual, and the Jinn just sits there and laughs at you. And but in the Middle East, they believe that the only way to get a Jinn out of the body is cause the body extreme pain, so the Jinn won't want to stay there, because the Jinn is inhabiting the body to experience physical pleasures. Some of them want to, not all of them, and of course, they're experiencing physical pleasure, so they're also going to experience pain. And if you want to get the Jinn out of the body, you've got to beat the body.
Makes sense. I mean, they're in there to actually feel things. So, if they're hooked up to the central nervous system in some way so that they can experience the pleasures of touch and all those other things, then beating somebody senseless would certainly be an effective way to send a message to the Jinn in that case.
And the clerics, don't want to harm the body, because when the person is reawakened in the body, they're going to have this broken bones and broken ribs and bruised bodies and possibly permanent damage to internal organs. So they try to bargain with the Jinn, and they say, okay, well, you can have the body for a week or 2 weeks, but if you stay longer than that, this is going to happen to you. And the Jinn will usually say, I swear by Allah, I will stay in here a week and I will behave myself. I just want to experience this, and I will go. And if the Jinn doesn't go, that's what they do. They beat the body. I mean, so heck of a way to wake up if you're unconscious with all these bruises on your body. But it continues to happen over there. It's still a practice that's in use.
Very fascinating. Very fascinating. Phil, let's take a minute right now for you to tell us what you're working on right now. Do you have a new book in the works, and what kind of researches are you doing right now?
Well, I'm really fascinated with the idea that there are portals that open up, and that when these portals open up, it can be detected, and it's possible at this time to communicate through these portals. Even with electromagnetic radiation, which is, radio and so on. And so I've been doing a lot of experiment in that area and has come up with some fascinating results. I mean, for example, I have a book coming out in December that was also co-authored with Rosemary Ellen Guiley called Interdimensional Portals, The Search for the Origin of Paranormal Phenomena. And that's coming out in December, and that's going to have a lot of research about electronic voice phenomena in association with Jinn, dimensional beings, other realities. Also, we've done a number of different experiments with modified equipment, picking up signals from the magnetosphere. Now, the magnetosphere, when you have these magnetic loops forming there, I believe that portals open up between other dimensional realities, and it's possible to receive information leaking from there and to monitor that. We've actually picked up stuff that has been sent to radio experts and electronic experts and engineers, and that has defied explanation. Sounds through the magnetosphere. Now, if you look at this, Nikola Tesla and Marconi claim to have received the same thing back in the late 1800s and the 1900s. And what they described is exactly what we were able to receive. with the proper antenna, which was designed by me, proper equipment, which was designed by me. And all of this research is coming out in the book in December. I just finished another work called Files from the Edge 2, Haunted Places, which is my investigations into areas that were considered haunted or cursed and so on. They include revolutionary battlegrounds, the Alamo, and places like that, places where paranormal phenomena seems to be very, very prominent. That book's coming out in 2012. Well, if 2012 is the end of the world, it doesn't leave much room for royalties, does it? But anyway,
no, and I better get it real quick and read it fast.
So that's in the works right now. But the book that's coming out in December, Portals, that is really going to set the world, the paranormal world, on fire, because we have got some fascinating results in there, in the idea of dimensional portal research, which, by the way, is within the reach of anyone with the new technologies that are available. And I had actually built something called the Portal Detector. And the theory is, of course, is that elementary particles throughout the universe are either restricted to our dimensional reality, or they flow through the universe and the multiverse in the other dimensions freely. One such particle that would be transparent to the entire cosmos are gravitons, which haven't been discovered yet, but they're suspected to exist, and I think it's only a matter of time. Now, theoretically, the gravity from the sun should actually rip the Earth apart, but it doesn't. If there are 11 dimensions of space, and the gravitons were being filtered through 11 dimensions before they reach Earth, you could explain in physics why gravity is, in fact, the weakest force, because it's being filtered out. It's like having an electric heater on and moving far away from it and putting glass barriers between it. By the time you have 11 barriers and you're maybe 10 feet across the room, you feel very little heat after a while. Now, when these portals open up, theoretically, there should be a rain of gravitons. Now, these portals can open up to the size of an atomic nucleus, or they could open up to, the size big enough for a human to jump through. Of course, the bigger the portal, the more the rain of gravitons you're going to have. Now, these gravitons should have an effect on elementary particles just the same as photons do. In other words, they could be absorbed by electrons. But the number of gravitons hitting an electrons would be much less. So you have to have a material that has a dense matrix of electrons. One of the materials that I've been able to achieve, because I worked on it, is an alloy of gallium and aluminum, which was not originally designed for this. When you bombard this alloy with high photonic energy in X-rays for hours and hours, the electrons migrate to a matrix into higher energy levels further from the nucleus, and the material gets a transparent effect. This little piece of material with these dense matrix of electrons that's transparent now, it's metal, it's like a micron thick, a half a micron, well, less than that. Theoretically, it has a better chance of absorbing gravitons. When gravitons hit the material, the electrons jump up to the higher conduction band and in turn, regenerate and collide and in turn produce a flow of electrons and photons. And this is put into a gas tube, which causes a cascading event, causing positive and negative particles to accumulate on an anode and a cathode, creating an electric current, which is amplified by the circuit. And the prototype was very successful. And now I have a second prototype, which is actually hooked up to my laptop. But every time we got readings of higher than 100 counts per minute, we always got incredible EVP on radio sweep devices. So as far as I'm concerned, the early experimentation in this area is being very promising. And we're going to do more research this summer in this area. We got some incredible EVP that's, not just one word, but in-time conversations. So, and in some of these conversations, the entities are identifying themselves as Jinn. And it blew me away to hear it on the, once we play back the material and just listen to it carefully.
And that sounds really fascinating, and it sounds like a really promising area of research. When you initially were talking about the messages coming across, I was going to ask you about Marconi, but you already brought him up before I had a chance to. And for people who are not familiar with that story, imagine, if you will, someone who invents a device that is the only one of its kind. There's no one on the planet that has another one to be transmitting anything on, and you're picking up signals with it. And this is, in effect, what was going on. Marconi, Tesla invent the radio, and they start receiving signals on it before anybody has a radio transmitter to be sending signals to them, which is quite a fascinating thing in and of itself. And if anybody is interested to look into that, I certainly recommend that they do, because it is an interesting story. But you also have had certainly what you would consider strong circumstantial evidence that these portals can, in fact, be detected by this group of people who are trying to capture a Jinn or an interdimensional creature because of the military showing up in close proximity in space and time to one of these portals opening. It seems like a very strong circumstantial case that they can be detected, and maybe it might be that you've hit on a way to do that.
Well, this is possible, of course, if my meager resources, but if you're talking about a government operation or an operation that's composed of funded by a number of governments, their resources would be unlimited. So who knows what technology that they have to detect portals in some of the things that they've received already, or information that they have in this special unit, whoever they are. Mm-hmm. And people often say to me, "Oh yes, you've been involved in this for 30 years. What have you proven?" and so on. Well, I think I've proven quite a bit when you consider that you're dealing with someone, me and others, like me, who primarily do this, in their spare time. And I have a regular job, And,
exactly, just like everybody else in this field, that people need to realize.
We would have never went to the moon if we had to depend upon people to work in their spare time on the weekends from, funding material from whatever money they can get together. Mm-hmm. So I believe that there are a good deal of paranormal researchers out there that, have done, should be congratulated for what they've accomplished over the years with the resources that they have. And it's just, some people don't say that. They think, what have you proven so far? Come on, I always say, well, if you get, for example, some benefactor to donate millions and millions of dollars, and you get the best people who have open minds, let's say, that are from many different fields together, and just say to them, maybe 10, 15 people, you have this big budget. You don't have to worry about a job for 5 years because you're going to be paid. And you go out there and study this, and at the end of 5 years, produce a thesis, a document, or a book, or a big report indicating your findings. And I bet you, if that ever happens, a lot of the puzzles and riddles that we have today will be solved.
Well, it's certainly an avenue of research, and is what part of the reason why I do this show is because I think that paranormal research is one of the principal ways in which future consciousness expansion, just from a purely knowledge point of view for humanity is concerned, but also along technological lines, because I think there's going to be a greater emphasis being placed on the interdimensional angle in paranormal research, thanks to people like yourself, Phil, who are focusing on this as being, if not the only source of paranormal phenomena, at least one that is very significant. And I think that it has potential to reveal not only, like I said, just basic knowledge about how our universe actually works, but also in advancement to mankind's consciousness, understanding of nature and themselves, and technology, of course, which could be incredibly liberating for people as well. I think it is a very vital area of interest, and I think it's a very important one, and that's why I try to promote it as best I can by doing the show and trying to bring guests like you on to talk about this, because I really do think this is a very strong potential for our future, and I see it developing even more every time I talk to someone. It just reinforces in my mind that idea that this is a crucial thing that needs to be studied, it needs to be understood, and there's a lot of answers that people can gain out of the paranormal and out of research in the paranormal if they approach it from a point of view of taking it seriously and are willing to invest the time and energy into doing it. I really believe that. Oh,
most definitely. I mean, there's just so many aspects of paranormal that, let me put it this way, you could never get bored.
No, and it's just like what you said earlier, when I asked you how you got involved in this. I mean, you got involved in it the same way I got involved with it, probably the same way nearly everybody is, and that is that you start out with a fascination of something that is unexplained or, seemingly against what you've been told or thought could happen, and then you have, whatever spurs you to finally take a step, who knows, but you do. And then you just get involved, and the ball starts rolling. And I think that what you said is absolutely true. It's so fascinating and interesting, all the different aspects. The real question is how can you not be fascinated by it? It'd be more of a strange thing for someone to be given a lot of information about some of the stranger aspects of the paranormal and not become involved in it, then to actually decide to do the research. But we have probably about 15 minutes left here. So what I would like to do, Phil, is for you to tell us one of the most memorable cases that you have been involved in your research, something that left a particular mark upon yourself. Something that has stayed with you since you did your initial research into it, and something that just one of the most bizarre or unusual or most memorable cases that you were involved in, and give us some of the details behind that.
Well, I guess one of the most bizarre cases that I've been involved in was back in the late 70s, and back then I was pure UFO research. And however, when you're researching UFOs, all of a sudden some of these bizarre high strangeness cases come to your attention, like people claiming contact with aliens and so on and so on. And they were far in between, but when they popped up, boy, we really didn't know how to deal with them back then. And even today, many UFO investigators avoid these cases. Now, there was one particular case, and the story's written in Interdimensional Universe, and I actually wrote about it for the first time, Interdimensional Universe, but Well, we had put together a research team, and our research team was composed of people from many different fields. We were investigating UFOs. And what happened is that we came across one particular case where a woman claimed that she had contact with a being from a black hole that would appear. And the being looked like a lizard man, like a demonic entity. And and she claimed that her mother also had the experience, and now her daughter was having experiences. So, we have 3 generations of encounters where this being would come through a hole that would appear in the night in their bedroom and take them. The grandmother when she was younger, the mother, and now the daughter was like 10 years old, 8 years old. She was having the experiences. Now the mother was so afraid that the daughter was going to disappear one night, so she would sleep with them. And this is a single mother. And so, well, we went there, and just to do an initial investigation, members of our team, back then, taking all the pictures and everything and trying to get things on, cassette tapes, and so on, doing the whole, Project Blue Book thing,
Yes.
So on. But as we're sitting there, and she's telling us of her sightings and her encounters and so on, the daughter just runs out of the bedroom and goes, UFO, outside now. So we look outside, and across the lawn there's this globe that must have been about the size of, I would say, a softball, orange and yellow in color, moving across the lawn, maybe about 50 feet from the door. And, of course, I run out, and as I approach it, it moves away. And then as I back up, it starts coming close. And in the meantime, everybody on the team is out there snapping photographs, And then the object came close and shot straight up in the air. And that was like the first time we had ever experienced everything. So everybody was like, wow. So that was it for the night. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to bring in a hypnotherapist and have the woman go through, regressive hypnosis to find out what happened in a lot of these missing time periods she had where she was taken into this black hole by this dimensional being. So the hypnotherapist decided that, the entire team shouldn't be there. The hypnotherapist will be there, and one person from the team will be there. So I was selected, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world. So we get there, and he goes, he has trouble putting her into a relaxed state. Now, her daughter, whose name was Kathy, was in the bedroom at the time, and she was sick with the flu. So she was in the bedroom. So the mother went into, started drifting off. And as soon as she started drifting off and started talking about how she was abducted by these creatures who came through this hole, this black hole, they called the man from the black hole, the daughter starts screaming. Now, the tape recorder is going at this time. Okay, it's recording the entire session. The daughter starts screaming, and she snaps out of it immediately and runs to the bedroom. And the daughter's running out of the bedroom at the same time, and they meet. And she said, the man, he came through the black hole. He said he was going to take me away. And her mother tried to assure her, daughter, this was just a dream. But this was one of the most, spine-tingling things that I've ever experienced. The daughter, this little girl in her nightgown, looks at me, points her finger, and says, he wants you to stop. He says he knows exactly where you and your friends are, and he knows how to get you.
Ooh.
And, oh, my gosh, I was like, just kind of like, backing off. This kid was like, her eyes were like big and black, and my gosh. So I go back, and the tape recorder's still on. I stop the tape recorder, and we decide, this is going to be the end of this session. So we stay around for a while, and then we leave. And now at our next meeting, because we used to have meetings once a week at my house down in my basement, where, we would bring cases and evidence and so on. And one of our members was a police officer. The other was a biologist. One was a pilot. The other one was a journalist. The other one was an executive for IBM. And one of them was another member was an electrical engineer, and another member was a professional photographer. And we were talking about this case, and I mentioned what happened. And they said they would like to listen to the tape of the session so far of what we had, before the interruption and everything from the little girl. I said, fine. The tape was running the whole time. I said I never, rewound it. So I put the tape in and I put it on rewind. And I said, well, we're listening into it for the first time. And I play the tape. And on the tape, it starts off with the hypnotist talking about, you going, relaxing, and so on. Then all of a sudden, the voices were covered up by this howling, this screaming that we didn't hear with our ears, and some type of unknown language. Okay? And then this unknown language was going out throughout the tape, and then it started speaking English, clear. There was a doo-doo-doo-doo. Then the voice came in, a very, very demonic-sounding voice saying, we know who you are. You are pointed out to us. And then it said something about being from some type of council that about the parallel dimensions and so on, where they're from. Then it faded out again, and all this howling came back on. I tell you, it sounded like something from The Exorcist.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, and this language came back on again. So, and there was, a lot of static on there and so on and so on. So everybody was looking at the thing. Everybody was just speechless. Because on the tape, we were all being threatened. To back off. So this unknown language really intrigued me. So I took it to a friend of mine at the State University in New York at Purchase, and this person did a lot of the audio. He's an audio technician. Does a lot of the taping of lectures and so on and so on. And he had big reel-to-reel tape recorders back then. They were still doing that. There was no digital stuff. And I said, listen to this. What do you make of it? Can you clear up some of this? I play the tape, and he says, yeah, I know what language that is. I said, what? He says, it's English backwards.
Oh.
I said, how do you know? I said. He said, well, when he tapes a lecture and stuff, he puts it on the reel-to-reel, and he puts it on backward, and he could hear the voices going backwards. Because he knows where to stop. And he said, watch, let me listen. So he takes the cassette tape, and he plays it and records it on his big reel-to-reel. And, he plays it the reverse way. And my gosh, it was English. This voice was saying that it was from an extraterrestrial source. It was something from some type of council. It gave its name as Ablis. Now, when I think about that today, my study of the Jinn, well, it sounded a lot like Iblis.
Yeah. And
it was talking about us backing off, that we would suffer all these accounts and so on. I mean, it was talking about the Bermuda Triangle, and that's a portal area. Wow. And I mean, it was like, and then I played it for the group, and everybody was like terrified. Because once again, so that's not what happened next. Is that everybody in the group, except for me, started experiencing strange phenomena. For example, the biologist calls me up one day and he says he made contact. I said, you made contact with who? He said, these beings entered his room. They were small. They had cloaks over their head, and they were blue. he said, and they were speaking in a language I couldn't understand, but they want me to do something. And I didn't know how to handle this back then. I thought he was kidding me at first. Then he calls me again about 3 days later, and he says he keeps on hearing the voices, and they keep on waking him up at night, and they're taking him, and they want him to do something. And he said he doesn't know what they want him to do. Well, 2 days after that, 3 days pass, 4 days pass, 5 days pass. I didn't hear from him again. I found out that he went down and jumped in front of a train and killed himself.
Oh, my goodness.
Both of his legs were severed off.
Gee.
Now, another member of the team had this experience where he woke up and he saw this tall, hooded being with red eyes standing over his bed. And it stretched out its arm, and his arm was like all leathery, and his hand was all leathery. And in his hand, he had a beating heart. And he said, "This could be your heart." And he squeezed it, and all blood shot all over the place on the bed and the walls. And he woke up, and it was like the most lucid, incredible dream. And his wife was, saying, "What's wrong?" He said he was looking on the sheets and stuff for blood. That's how real the dream was. Well, he goes in for a checkup with his doctor. The doctor finds something wrong with his heart. He has heart surgery, and they said, well, it's a simple thing. They can fix it, no problem. Well, he survives the surgery. A few days later after surgery, he has a heart attack and dies in the hospital.
Wow.
Now, the police officer started having paranormal phenomena. This is probably one of the most strangest things. His wife was always supportive of our investigations. He calls me up and says, "My wife is not my wife anymore. Something's wrong. It's like somebody replaced her. His wife wouldn't even have us around the house anymore." He claimed that all of these manifestations were taking place. His wife had changed. They had seen UFOs follow them in the car. He said, "I'm out of this." He said, "I'm out of this investigation." Now, one of the persons who was an engineer who was an atheist calls me up and said he keeps on hearing his son talking to somebody at night, and he snuck in the bedroom, and his son was like playing with something on the floor. And then in the day, he asked his son, "Who are you talking to at night?" He said, "The man appeared in front of my room and said that if I hurt you, he will let me play with the dog's name." I forgot the dog's name, who was dead. So he said, "Well, if you hurt your father, I will give you back your dead puppy to play with." And he was like playing with the puppy on the floor that was invisible. And all of his stuff started to happen to this person, this electrical engineer. He actually got scared out of all of his investigation because he claimed it was from the devil, and he became a born-again Christian. Now, the pilot was visited by several men, strange-looking men who claimed to be from the National Security Agency and the CIA, who told him that if he didn't give up UFO research, that he would never fly again and would never get a job to support his family. And, of course, he backed out. Now, they were like the men in black that visited him. So this team totally fell apart because of this case. But during this time, out of all the team members having different experiences like this, nothing happened to me. But this was probably one of the most amazing, incredible cases that convinced me that there was some type of real phenomena behind all this that wanted to stay hidden, and that at times it would go through incredible extremes to stay hidden. We touched on a case that obviously this intelligence didn't want anybody messing with because they were doing something, and would go to incredible violent extremes to keep it secret.
Wow.
And that's the most amazing. I wrote about that for the first time in Interdimensional Universe, which was published just a few years ago, but I kept the story just private since the 1970s, because every time when I was rewriting it, I was just having chills up and down my spine and reliving that whole incident with what happened. So that's the most incredible one.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Phil. And I'm going to have to run and get my copy of that book because I have it, and look up that case so I can read it there in the written word. It sounds like an
absolute. It's called the Dream Team.
Very good, very good. Phil, thank you so much for coming on the show
You're welcome.
today. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties there at the beginning.
No problem. I'm used to them.
I'm looking forward to your new book coming out, and I wish you well in your research, and I'll keep in touch with you, and I look forward to talking to you some more in the future because you really do have a lot to offer, and I really appreciate your time today, so thanks again.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, Phil. You have a nice evening, and I'll talk to you again soon, all right?
All right, bye.
Okay, bye-bye. That was Phil Imbrogno, and I just want to thank him again for being such a gracious host with his time. Sorry about the problems at the beginning. Join me next week for another show, same time, same place. Thank you. Good night.